The afternoon sun beat down on the sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, where 17-year-old Damien Ashford lounged by the infinity pool, scrolling through his phone with practiced indifference. His father, Richard Ashford, owned half the commercial real estate in the tri-state area, a fact Damien never let anyone forget. More lemonade, he snapped without looking up, thrusting his empty glass toward the figure approaching with fresh towels. Nina Santos, the estate manager who'd worked for the Ashfords for 15 years, took the glass with quiet dignity. "Of course, Mr. Damien. And tell your daughter to stop parking that junker of hers near the front entrance," he added, his voice dripping with contempt. "It's embarrassing when my friends come over. This isn't a trailer park." Maria's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Her daughter Nina had driven her to work that morning after Maria's car broke down. Nina, 21 and home for the summer from college, had parked her old Honda sedan near the service entrance, not even close to the main driveway. "I'll let her know," Maria replied evenly, turning to leave. "Wait," Damien sat up, squinting at something across the lawn. "Is that her over there? The one trimming the hedges?" "Nina's helping with the garden work today, yes." Damien's lip curled. "Perfect. She can bring me the lemonade. I want to tell her about the car myself." 20 minutes later, Nina appeared carrying a silver tray, her work gloves stuffed in her back pocket. She was lean and muscular, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face glistening with honest sweat. "Your lemonade," she said, setting the tray down on the table beside him. Damien didn't even glance at it. "You know, you people really need to understand your place around here. That rust bucket you drove up in? It makes the whole property look cheap. My father pays your mother well enough, maybe she should buy you a decent car. Or better yet, you could just stay home." Nina's hands clenched at her sides. "That rust bucket gets me where I need to go. And I parked exactly where your mother told us to park." "Don't talk back to me," Damien said, rising from his lounger. At 6 feet tall, he towered over her by several inches. "Do you know who I am? Who my father is?" "I know exactly who you are," Nina said quietly, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. Something about her steady gaze infuriated him. Damien had grown up getting whatever he wanted, watching everyone from teachers to business associates defer to his father's wealth and power. This girl, this nobody, was looking at him like he was ordinary. "You want to keep staring at me like that?" He stepped closer, invading her space. "Maybe you need someone to teach you some respect." "Step back," Nina warned, her voice low. Instead, Damien reached out and shoved her shoulder, not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to assert dominance, to remind her of her place in his world. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Nina's reflexes, honed by 5 years of competitive boxing and a scholarship to train at one of New York's premier gyms, kicked in automatically. She shifted her weight, caught his wrist mid-push, and in one fluid motion, swept his legs out from under him. Damien crashed onto the pool deck with a humiliating thud, the wind knocked out of him. He lay there gasping, stunned, as Nina stood over him. "I didn't want to do that," she said. "But you put your hands on me. Don't ever do that again." She turned and walked away, leaving him sprawled on the expensive Italian tile. By evening, Richard Ashford had returned from the city, and Damien had worked himself into a self-righteous fury. He'd embellished the story, of course in his version, Nina had attacked him unprovoked, possibly tried to rob him. "Fire her. Fire both of them," Damien demanded, pacing his father's study. "That girl assaulted me on our own property." Richard, a silver-haired man in his 50s who'd built his empire through ruthless calculation rather than inheritance, looked at his son with thinly veiled disappointment. "Maria's been with us for 15 years. She's never given us a moment's trouble. I don't care. Are you going to let some housekeeper's kid put her hands on your son?" Richard sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew his son was spoiled. His late wife had indulged the boy's every whim before she passed, and Richard had been too busy building his empire to correct course. Now Damien was insufferable, arrogant, and utterly unprepared for real life. But Richard was also pragmatic. Causing a scene over this incident could be messy. Simpler to just let the Santos women go, give them a generous severance, and be done with it. "I'll speak to Maria in the morning," he said finally. Maria took the news with the same quiet dignity she'd shown for 15 years. No arguments, no tears, just a simple nod. I understand, Mr. Ashford. We'll be out by tomorrow afternoon. But when she told Nina that evening in their small apartment in Stamford, her daughter's reaction was different. This is insane, Nina exploded, pacing their tiny kitchen. He put his hands on me first. I was defending myself. I know, Mija. But they have the power. We don't. That's not right. No, Maria agreed softly. It's not. But it's reality. Nina spent the night stewing in anger and injustice. She'd worked so hard, maintained a 3.8 GPA while training before dawn and after classes, won the regional Golden Gloves championship in her weight class, earned a full scholarship to NYU. She'd done everything right, and here was Damien Ashford, who'd never worked for anything in his life, who'd assaulted her, and he got to face zero consequences while she and her mother lost their livelihoods. The unfairness of it burned in her chest like acid. 3 days later, Nina was back at her gym in the Bronx, pounding out her frustration on the heavy bag. Her coach, Tommy Rodriguez, a former welterweight contender who'd trained champions, watched her with knowing eyes. "Want to tell me what's eating you?" he asked during her water break. She told him everything. Tommy listened without interruption, then leaned back against the ropes. "You know what I'm about to say, don't you? That life isn't fair. That you're better than this punk," Tommy corrected. "You've got discipline, skill, heart. You've earned everything you've got. He's had everything handed to him. That's why he's weak, and you're strong." "Doesn't feel like I'm strong," Nina muttered. "Feels like I'm powerless." "Powerless? Kid, you dropped him on his ass in 3 seconds. That's not powerless." Tommy grinned. "How would you like to feel really powerful?" "What do you mean?" "There's a charity boxing exhibition next month at the Waldorf. Socialites, business types, they raise money for youth programs. Some of them actually get in the ring, try their hand at it. Most of them have trained for maybe 6 weeks. His grin widened. "Guess whose name I saw on the participant list?" Nina's eyes widened. "No. Oh yes. Apparently young Mr. Ashford fancies himself an athlete. Been training at some fancy gym in Greenwich with a private coach. Thinks he's going to impress everyone. Tommy, you've been looking for your next match anyway. This would be sanctioned, all above board. You'd both wear headgear, use regulation gloves. 3 2-minute rounds." He crossed his arms. "What do you say?" Nina thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. "I'm in." Over the next 4 weeks, Nina trained like never before. She ran at dawn, sparred in the afternoon, studied film at night. Tommy brought in different partners to simulate various fighting styles, drilled her relentlessly on combinations, footwork, defense. "Remember," he said before every session, "this isn't about revenge. This is about showing grace under pressure. You're a boxer, a real athlete. You represent something bigger than yourself. You go in there with discipline, with honor, and you let your skills speak." Nina understood. This wasn't about humiliating Damien, it was about demonstrating what hard work and dedication could achieve against entitled mediocrity. Meanwhile, Damien was indeed training, though his sessions bore little resemblance to Nina's. His private coach, hired at an exorbitant rate, mostly fed his ego while teaching him basic combinations. Damien assumed that his natural athletic ability, he'd played lacrosse in prep school, after all, would carry him through. The charity event was just another opportunity to impress people, to be admired. He had no idea who his opponent would be. The organizers matched fighters based on weight class and experience level, and they'd registered Damien as a novice. Nina, fighting in these events for 3 years now, was technically a novice to amateur status, no professional bouts. On paper, they were evenly matched. The night of the exhibition arrived with Manhattan's elite filling the Waldorf's grand ballroom. A regulation boxing ring stood at the center, surrounded by round tables where guests in evening wear sipped champagne and bid on silent auction items between bouts. Richard Ashford sat ringside, slightly uncomfortable in his tuxedo, wondering why his son had insisted on participating in something so barbaric. Still, If it made Damien happy and helped raise money for underprivileged youth, the irony was not lost on Richard, he'd support it. In the makeshift locker room, Damien shadowboxed in the mirror, admiring his reflection. His coach wrapped his hands, offering final words of encouragement that Damien barely heard. He was imagining his father's pride, the approving nods from business associates, maybe even a photo in the society pages. In the opposite locker room, Nina sat quietly while Tommy wrapped her hands with practiced efficiency. "You remember what this is about?" he asked. "Discipline. Honor. Letting my skills speak." "That's right. And staying calm. Breathing. Staying in control." Tommy nodded. "And if you happen to knock him out, well, that's just good boxing." Nina smiled despite her nerves. When the ring announcer called the fourth match of the evening, Damien emerged first to polite applause. He climbed through the ropes, waving to the crowd, soaking in the attention. Then Nina appeared. Richard Ashford's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Even from a distance, even with her hair braided back and headgear obscuring part of her face, he recognized her. Maria's daughter. The girl Damien had claimed attacked him. The girl his son was about to fight. In the ring, Damien's confident smile evaporated as Nina ducked through the ropes and stood in the opposite corner. Their eyes met, and recognition crashed over him like a wave. What is this?" he stammered, looking at the referee. "Problem, son?" the ref asked. Damien's mind raced. He couldn't back out now, not in front of all these people, not in front of his father. But the memory of being dumped on the pool deck flashed through his mind, along with a belated realization. She'd done that effortlessly, almost casually, like swatting a fly. "No problem," he heard himself say, though his voice sounded hollow. The referee called them to the center of the ring for instructions. Up close, Nina looked even more formidable, focused, calm, professional. This was her element. "Touch gloves, keep it clean, protect yourselves at all times," the ref instructed. Nina extended her gloves. Damien, still trying to salvage his pride, tapped them with barely concealed hostility. "You think you're clever," he hissed under his breath. "You think this proves something?" Nina's expression didn't change. "The bell will answer that." They returned to their corners. Tommy gave Nina's shoulders a quick squeeze. "Box smart. Use your jab. Let him come to you." The bell rang. Damien charged forward immediately, throwing wild haymakers fueled by anger and embarrassment. Nina slipped the first punch, blocked the second, and circled away, keeping distance. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Some of them knew enough about boxing to recognize the difference in skill level immediately. "Come on," Damien shouted, rushing forward again. Nina waited until he was off balance mid-swing, then snapped out a crisp jab that popped his head back. Then another. Then a quick combination, jab, straight right, that had Damien stumbling backward, his eyes wide with shock. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was stronger, bigger, a man. She was just. Another combination rocked him, this one ending with a hook to the body that drove the air from his lungs. Damien clinched desperately, holding on until the referee separated them. "Box," the ref commanded. Richard Ashford sat forward in his seat, watching his son get systematically dismantled. Every punch Nina threw was purposeful, precise. She wasn't brawling, she was giving a clinic. And Damien, despite his month of training, looked like exactly what he was, a privileged amateur who'd never faced real adversity. The first round ended with Damien slumped on his stool, gasping, while his coach tried to rally him with increasingly desperate advice. Across the ring, Nina sat calmly, barely winded, listening to Tommy's tactical adjustments. "He's got nothing," Tommy said. "But stay sharp. Don't get careless." Round 2 began with Damien trying a different approach, circling, trying to use his reach advantage. Nina adjusted immediately, cutting off the ring, using angles to trap him against the ropes. When she unloaded a combination, Damien could only cover up, absorbing punches on his gloves and arms. The crowd was fully engaged now, some cheering Nina's technical excellence, others gasping at the one-sided nature of the match. This wasn't competitive, this was educational. Midway through the second round, Damien landed his first clean punch, a jab that caught Nina on the headgear. For a moment, hope flared in his chest. He threw a follow-up right hand with all his strength. Nina saw it coming from a mile away. She slipped under it, pivoted, and drove a picture-perfect left hook into his ribs, the same spot she targeted in round 1. Damien's knees buckled. His breath came in ragged gasps. The referee stepped in, giving him a standing 8 count. "You want to continue?" the ref asked, peering into Damien's eyes. Pride, stubborn pride, made him nod. The bell saved him seconds later. In his corner, Damien's coach considered throwing in the towel. "Maybe that's enough, champ. You've got nothing to prove." "One more round," Damien wheezed. I can do this." But he couldn't. Round 3 lasted 45 seconds. Nina came out patient but determined, working behind her jab, setting up her combinations. Damien, exhausted and hurt, tried to mount one final charge. Nina stopped him with a straight right hand that landed flush on his jaw, not her hardest punch, but perfectly timed and placed. Damien's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the canvas, not knocked unconscious but thoroughly beaten, unable to continue. The referee waved off the fight without bothering to count. The crowd erupted, half in appreciation of Nina's skill, half in shock at what they'd witnessed. Nina, ever professional, went immediately to check on Damien, extending a gloved hand to help him up. He stared at it, then at her face, and something in him finally cracked. Not his pride that was already shattered, but the shell of entitlement that had encased him for 17 years. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his mouth guard making the words mushy. For everything." Nina pulled him to his feet. "Apology accepted. But you should apologize to my mother too." The referee raised Nina's hand to another round of applause. She smiled, absorbing the moment not because she'd humiliated someone, but because she'd proven something to herself. Hard work mattered. Discipline mattered. Character mattered. 30 minutes later, after the ice packs and the congratulations and the photos, Nina found her mother in the crowd. Maria had watched the entire fight with her hands clasped in her lap, pride and worry warring on her face. They embraced wordlessly. Richard Ashford approached them hesitantly, Damien trailing behind, still in his boxing gear, his face puffy and bruised. "Ms. Santos," Richard began. "And Nina, I owe you both an apology. I was told a very different version of what happened at my home. I've since learned the truth from my son," he added, glancing back at Damien, who stared at the floor. "I'd like to offer you your position back, Maria, with a significant raise. And Nina, I'd like to fund your training expenses. Tommy Rodriguez spoke very highly of you. Said you have Olympic potential." Nina blinked in surprise. Tommy must have cornered Richard after the fight. "You don't have to do that," Maria said quietly. "I know. But I want to. Consider it an investment in someone who's earned it." Richard looked at his son. "Damien." The young man stepped forward, finally meeting Nina's eyes. "I'm sorry. For the way I treated you. For the things I said. For being a complete asshole. You were defending yourself, and I tried to get you and your mom fired because my ego was hurt. That was wrong." The apology was clumsy but genuine. Nina could see the shame in his face, the dawning awareness of his own behavior. "Thank you," she said simply. "I hope you learned something tonight." "Yeah," Damien said, touching his sore ribs gingerly. "I learned I'm not as tough as I thought I was. And that." He paused, struggling for words. "That the stuff I thought made me better than people, the money, the name, doesn't mean anything if I'm a shitty person." It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest. Over the following months, Nina accepted Richard's support, which allowed her to train full-time while finishing her degree. She went on to win the national championships in her weight class and eventually made the Olympic team. Damien, to everyone's surprise, stayed in touch with boxing not as a competitor, but as a volunteer coach for underprivileged kids at Tommy's gym. He'd never be a fighter, but working with young people who had so little but tried so hard changed something fundamental in him. Slowly, painfully, he learned humility. And Maria? She returned to the Ashford estate, not as a housekeeper but as estate manager with real authority and respect. Richard, forced to confront his own failures as a father, began the long work of rebuilding his relationship with his son, this time based on values rather than indulgence. 3 years later, when Nina won bronze at the Olympics, the Santos and Ashford families watched together from a private box, united by a journey that had begun with anger and injustice but ended with growth and redemption. Because sometimes, the fights that matter most aren't won in the ring, they're won in the quiet moments when people choose to be better than they were before.